welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Vampires, and we are here for the third time about the Clan of Fiends, the Tzimisce, the Tzimisce, call them what you like, really. Now, why have I made 3 videos about the Tzimisce? Well, I made the first one as the Gentleman's Guide to Vampires, mostly in character as far as I recall. I've not watched it recently. The second one was by viewer request, and I think it might be private now. And this is my third one, being requested by Gary, who was kind enough to go over to BackerKit, pick up a hard copy of The World Below, the book I conceptualized, developed, co-authored, and so forth with writers such as Ed Greenwood. And as I have said, if you pick up a hard copy of The World Below, you send me proof via MatthewDawkins.com, well, I am more than happy at that point to make a video of your request within reason. And for a little while I thought, do I want to make another video on the Tzimisce? And I've decided, yeah, why not? And it's mainly because V5's Tzimisce have had a little time to bed in now, but, I mean, cards on the table, I have only glanced through the V5 Companion and the Player's Guide. I have not studied them at length. I've not used them in a game, so I cannot attest to how the Tzimisce play in V5. All I can do with this video is tell you how I like to play the Tzimisce, how I like to run the Tzimisce, and justify certain decisions made about that clan, and what I would do if I was to invent their Bane, for example, right from scratch for V5. Likewise, one could look at the same things for their disciplines spread. And maybe that's what we will do in this video. The first thing I like to say about the Tzimisce is they are not all evil by default. The Tzimisce are a very easy clan to fit into a very straightforward box. They're all sadists, torturers, extravagant decadists. Decadists? That's a new word for decadence. They are decadists. It's a little toreador, but perverted. It's not a bad concept. It's not a bad concept to have evil vampires, but I find it is also quite reductive. The Barley have already got that angle covered, and there is nothing in the Tzimisce's past, if you're to cleave to metaplot, to say that by being embraced by a Tzimisce, you automatically turn into a sexual sadist or masochist, flesh crafter, or the like. Which is why it has always surprised me. I guess it doesn't surprise me, it's a fun discipline. It's always made me think, when I run Vampire and someone makes a Tzimisce and the first thing they do is put 3 or 4 dots in Vicissitude, if we're looking at V20 or prior. Protean, I suppose, in V5. Because it feels like a very arcane discipline, not in the magical sense, but in the sense that it's mysterious, it's weird, it's inhuman. So why would someone who has first become a vampire, become a vampire within the matter of nights, be suddenly committed to warping people's flesh? It doesn't compute. I need a rationale for that. And with the Tzimisce, that rationale is often tied to the Sabbat. You see, while the La Sombra you can justify they are more interested in power than anything else, can be justified being Anarch or Camarilla, the Tzimisce, by their practices, tend to be more Sabbat-driven, which means that their sires are either embracing people who are already morally repugnant, or, upon your embrace, they go through the Sabbat retie that make you morally repugnant. I think it's one of those missed elements of the Sabbat that a lot of players kind of bypass on the way to just playing a monster with no restrictions, is the Sabbat is a brainwashing cult. They embrace you, they turn you into a monster through their various rites and rituals, and they basically hothouse you until you are prepared to swallow the Sabbat's truth. You are bloodbound repeatedly by multiple people, effectively, a gang rape, and by the end of it, you come out of it a bare shadow of the person you were when you were alive. If the only hand reaching out for you at that point to say, here is the way forward, I can show you the way, then you might well take it. And if that hand belongs to a Tzimisce, when they touch you, they might turn your hand into something else. But the point is, The Tzimisce are not evil in a vacuum, and being embraced by a Tzimisce doesn't immediately mean you become a wicked Dr. Steinman-style plastic surgeon. Rather, it is that the culture of the clan and the culture of the Sabbat is such that anyone embraced into it is immediately put through these various trials if you adhere to the meta plot. If you don't adhere to the meta plot, if you decide my Tzimisce sire is independent of all of that, and, well, there's no reason then for your character to suddenly become Ed Gein. You are just as possessed of your own mind as any other vampire. It doesn't matter if you've got Tzimisce Vitae in your system or not. You're not immediately going to be going around flesh crafting everything that you touch. But I guess you can, if that's what interests you. It's just quite difficult to balance it against your morality, I would say. So I always encourage people who are playing Tzimisce to not just dump all their discipline dots in vicissitude, or if they do, find out why they would do that. Figure out why they would do that. There has to be a reason. You don't just stumble into something like that, no more than you stumble into thaumaturgy or necromancy, or indeed blood sorcery or oblivion. So that's one element. Now, another thing that I think is worth considering with Tzimisce is outside of their pack, unless they are in a pack with other Tzimisce, or blood brothers maybe, they are probably quite independently minded. They keep themselves to themselves, because if you're playing your Tzimisce up as a flesh crafting sadist, you're going to need your own dungeon, your own lab, your own Jeffrey Dahmer style abode where you are going, which wasn't that isolated, to be fair. You're going to need your own shack in the woods where you can do your horrific things to your victims. And again, I encourage you to question why. Not because I want you to not play a Tzimisce, but because I think it is worth considering. Serial killers do not just spring out of thin air. If you are going to suddenly start torturing and murdering people because you're a Tzimisce, then why is it that the Tzimisce are making you do that? Well, maybe you can play up that there is a corruption in the blood. I mean, that was introduced in Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand, and I know you're booing right now, but Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand does have some really innovative ideas, and I think that's what I like about that book, and why I was very happy to work on the V20 version of it, because it introduces lots of alternate ways of playing Vampire the Masquerade, and having the Tzimisce Vitae basically be afflicted with a virus of a kind is, I think, actually quite innovative. It's interesting. It maybe explains why your Tzimisce behave in the inhuman way that they do, because the Tzimisce are less human than other vampires if we ignore the barley. So there's that. Now, in terms of clan structure, the Tzimisce don't really have a clan structure. They are far from an insular clan. That hasn't always been the case, of course. In the Dark Ages, the Tzimisce are one of the preeminent Eastern European clans. They have their voivodes, their vampires that they look up to, pay tribute to. They hold on to that sort of almost even pre-feudal style of system of tribute, and it's an unshaking one. This isn't the Ventru where you can climb up on the corpses of the people you slay, or the Inquisitors that you control in order to prove yourself as more powerful than the rest. No more than it's the La Sombra way of cutting the throats of everyone who gets in your path. It is the Tzimisce way is calcified. It is stratified. It is, you are at the bottom, and at the bottom you shall stay, because we have been lords of this land forever, and that isn't going to suddenly change overnight. Well, wouldn't you know, Anarch Revolt, it changed overnight. Actually, it changed over the course of close to a century, but it did enough to break up the Tzimisce to a way that they never really reformed. This is not a clan with a hierarchy anymore. This isn't the Nosferatu, where with their knowing each other and vaguely trusting each other. This isn't the Malkavians with their network. This isn't the Ministry with their cult, and it isn't the Ventru with their actual, sort of pillars of hierarchy. This is the Tzimisce without structure, and therefore, as I say, independent in a shack in the woods, because quite frankly, most domains can't support more than one sadistic serial killer at a time. Now, this actually means Tzimisce are quite well suited to mixed clan coteries, because if you play up the idea of the Tzimisce as all being festering evil, there can't be that many of them in a domain at once, and that, in a sense, makes the Tzimisce a more interesting prospect, I think. But who would tolerate them? Who would tolerate a clan that is more given to masquerade breaches, more given to violence? Well, the Sabbat. And so that takes us back to the sect that they're a part of and why they shouldn't really, in my view, be a part of any other sect if you play them to type. And if you're not playing them to type, there is a good question there. Why are you playing a Tzimisce? You're going to get the most out of your Tzimisce experience if you play the Tzimisce as the Tzimisce are written. You can come up with any great idea you like, and I'm sure you can come up with lots, but the fact is that sometimes when you create a character and you play so against archetype, you end up basically not getting anything good out of playing that clan. I guess as a personal experience that can be fine, but holistically I'd say that's probably not as rewarding. In terms of the Tzimisce Bane, obviously in classic Vampire it was that you needed to bury yourself in the soil from your homeland. Obviously a lot of people got around that with vicissitude and would just stick the earth in them. I would have just banned that and said, no, you do always need to return to your haven where the earth from your homeland is, and you can't store it in yourself. This is a mystical ritual, and so it's mystically broken if you try to subvert it. I remember, in fact, I think the very first Vampire the Masquerade game I ever played, there was Tzimisce doing that, so my mind immediately started working, thinking, well, that's a crap weakness if you can just get around it. Well, that just don't allow them to get around it. So yeah, you can have them locked to a specific haven that has their soil from the homeland in. And I like the territoriality aspect of the Tzimisce. It ties into their old ways, the old clan and so on, being feudal lords or proto-feudal lords of their various domains in Eastern Europe. And of course, that's got a Dracula feel to it too. But I don't think it's a terribly flavourful weakness, unless, of course, there's lots of situations that you're playing where your character is being kept from their haven, and therefore they're suffering weaknesses. I think you can do that. It's just a shame that there's not many storytellers who do. It's interesting. The weaknesses or Banes are, in a lot of ways, what define the clans. Apart from each other at a most basic level. But as you get more and more used to Vampire, I find storytellers don't tend to utilise those Banes as story elements. It's because, in my view, you either go one of two ways with it and rarely find the balance. You either hit them over the head with their Banes so often that it becomes a crutch, and a boring one at that, or you ignore it totally just so you can play a vampire without having to worry about all that Bane stuff. For some clans it's easier than others. Nosferatu are, of course, if you play them classically, hideous monstrosities. They can't get away from their Bane. The Malkavians are constantly afflicted by their Bane. The Toreador, on the other hand, theirs is more manageable, but a Sombra, classic Bane, infinitely more manageable. So, the Tzimisce and the whole sleeping in the earth soil, I'd go with something a little different. Leaning into the whole flesh crafting thing, because let's be honest, it is in large part what defines the Tzimisce. I prefer the whole dragons in castles imagery, but the flesh crafting is a massive part of what the clan is. I would tie the mutation factor to their Bane. That they cannot touch humans without mutating them. Maybe that means passing on an illness. Maybe it actually means making them uglier. You know, they drop in appearance dots or whichever system you happen to be using. That whenever you come into contact with a human, a mortal, you will warp them in some way, and not in a way that you can control. This is storyteller driven. This isn't vicissitude. Now, vicissitude can be used to recover their appearance, but then that creates a symbiotic relationship of you end up with these blood dolls with their plastic faces who don't, because you just keep changing how they look. And whenever you get in contact with them, they're desperate for their face to be perfected again. And every time they come into contact with you, they are mutated again. So you have to improve it again so you get better at it or not. If you get better at it, congratulations, you've got an entire league of incredibly stunning ghouls and blood dolls. If not, you've got a horrible monstrosity of Igors behind you. I like that as a Bane. It sounds severe, but again, it ties into the idea of the Tzimisce being corruptive, being infectious, being sadistic, and driven by the warping of the flesh. They are unnatural, and they essentially contaminate anything around them. That would be the kind of Bane I would go with were I writing them for V5 all of a sudden, but I appreciate that it's a little outre for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, where a lot of those Banes are significantly more subtle than that. I think it probably worked better in a V20 climate, but that's what I would lean towards, just to make them even more horrific and explain why they use vicissitude so much. You kind of have to. If everyone you're touching physically is getting warped, you need vicissitude to repair the damage, so it becomes an almost obligatory discipline, which works because most Tzimisce players give them vicissitude. The idea in V5 of vicissitude being an offshoot of Protean, I think, is fine. It makes sense within the V5 system. I would have probably put it as either Protean or blood sorcery, a kind of blood sorcery, but there's the possibility of dumping too many things into blood sorcery. So I think having the Tzimisce Ministry and Gangrel kind of rotate around the axis of Protean in different ways, with the Gangrel being, I guess, more mammalian, the Ministry being reptilian, and the Tzimisce being just flesh. It's a nice different spokes on the Protean wheel, as it were. And so I've got no issue with that. However, I would retain the same secondary disciplines that the Tzimisce tend to have, the Auspex and Animalism. I wouldn't lean into Dominate, because I think, although they are a dominant clan, I think their domination in Eastern Europe, in the Balkans, in Russia, and so forth, in the Dark Ages setting, is almost a force of will rather than a magical power. I think the old clan have Dominate, which is fine, but I think the Tzimisce, as we see them, don't control you by getting into your mind. They control you by terrifying you, by intimidating you, by showing you what will happen if you don't do as they say. So, the Tzimisce. Do I allow them to be played in my Chronicles? Yes, absolutely. Do I want justification for why you've put all 4 dots in vicissitude? Definitely. Do I want you to just play an unrelenting psychopath who wants to kill the rest of the members of their coterie? Absolutely not. Because the problem with evil characters is they can be incredibly disruptive. This is again a reason why the Tzimisce functions so well in the Sabbat, because it means you basically have a leash, a magical leash on the Tzimisce that means that they are not going to start betraying, warping, torturing the other members of their coterie, their pack. Rather, they will work alongside them devotedly because they are absolutely in love, to the point of course, bloodbound to their pack mates. But anyone else is fair game, and I think that's interesting. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that a clan is predominantly in one sect than the other. I think the way it falls down is in V5, because the Sabbat are not by default playable, without a bit of finagling, the Tzimisce are therefore shunted off. I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea to make a clan antagonistic by default. It makes the Tzimisce scary, the fact that they could be the black spiral dancers of Vampire the Masquerade. But we have got to the point with Vampire where clans like the Tzimisce are far too popular to put a paywall between you and playing them. Where we can't just say, no, they're evil now. A bit like the Get of Fenris. There's too much invested in playing them, so what actually needs to happen is they need to be reworked to fit within the game, but done so in a way that is flavorful, that makes sense. And I think the best way to do that is basically to say the Sabbat are playable, and there are cells of the Anarch movement that are pretty fucking monstrous. They don't adhere to the Sabbat's cult-like behavior, death or, well, death. But any Tzimisce that didn't drink the Sabbat Kool-Aid are likely to go there. I honestly cannot see how the average Tzimisce, at least the way they are played, would fit in well in a Camarilla domain. It just doesn't make sense to me. You're going to get players who want to play Tzimisce who are just subtle flesh crafters who want their dolls to look beautiful. Or I'm going to play a Tzimisce with 4 dots and Auspex and I don't care about the other disciplines. At that point, let's say you do have your character who is a Tzimisce with 4 dots and Auspex and a member of the Camarilla. I would love for people to comment below, and this isn't a challenge, it isn't a gotcha, I'm not trying to catch you out. I want you to come up with a reason for why that 4-dot Auspex Tzimisce is actually an interesting character to play. More interesting than a Toreador with 4 dots of Auspex or a Malkavian with 4 dots of Auspex. Is it simply because you are a rogue in the wrong sect? Because I've heard that one before lots and lots of times. The number of times I've encountered true Brujah pretending to be Toreador in the Camarilla or whatever, I've heard it, I've seen it. There's a reason I get cynical about Vampire these days. And Tzimisce hiding in the Camarilla as another clan, never using their vicissitude. In a way, I dislike that I have become so reductive that I see the Tzimisce as the vicissitude clan, because they can be a lot more. But I also quite like that they are a clan that has fallen from greatness. In a similar way to the Brujah, and while the Brujah can admit it, the Tzimisce cannot. Because the Tzimisce did have everything in their domains. They were the top dog, the number one. They were gods among their kind. No one dared cross them. Certainly no one crossed their territory without seeking permission first. And then they tied their flag to the Sabbat mast. They got rid of all their old masters, and what was left was a rabble without coordination. They were basically all told, be the best monsters you can be. And so, come the modern era, there is no unity, there's no driving force, there's no agenda for the Tzimisce other than to just be a monster. How screwed up would that make you if you were embraced, if a Tzimisce chose you and they said, I chose you to be my child because I wanted the best damn biologist in this clan. I wanted someone who could understand anatomy, the flaws in anatomy, the way cells reproduce, the way viruses spread. I wanted someone like you as my child. And the child says, great, okay, where do I go to work? Who do I speak to? How do I help the clan achieve its aims? We have no aims. I just wanted to make you like me. I wanted to show you to my peers on the rare occasions that I see them and say, this is my child. Isn't he great? So I'm just a toy? Well, yes, and one with a very long leash. I will send you off there into the woods. You can make your own go of it. Hang on. So you're not mentoring me? You're not bringing me... Oh, yes, there's the mentoring program. It involves being buried and brought back and having to hunt down. There's kicking a head down a football field, things like that, jumping over fires. And what does that have to do with Clan Tzimisce? Not much. That's more Sabbat than Tzimisce. But I will be watching from afar, making sure that you do me proud. Well, how can I do you proud? What is it that I have to do to make you proud? Don't fuck up. Against what? What are the parameters of fucking up? Do not disrespect me, child. Ah, okay, I'm getting that. I'm getting now that you don't want me to disrespect you. Okay, so I'll treat you with all respect. Sire, I'm looking up to you. I will do whatever it is you command. I want to learn from you. You're clearly an incredibly knowledgeable vampire. How old are you? Many hundreds of years. I once dwelled in a castle. Great. Okay, so you're Count Dracula. So you want me to live away from you. You want me to hunt on people. You want me to do whatever it is I find myself doing. And you want me to join this cult, the Sabbat. What has that got to do with our bloodline, our family, our Tzimisce? You must aspire to change. You must try to transcend. Ah, so now we're getting somewhere. You want me to transcend this mortal form and become something else. Right, I can work on that. How do I do that? You must discover the path for yourself. Oh, fuck! At which point the conversation breaks down. A diablerie probably ensues because Tzimisce. But yes, there is the transcendence element of the Tzimisce, which is, of course, that there are some, but it is by no means the majority. Tzimisce, fucked up that pronunciation, on the path of metamorphosis, who want to become something more than human, as in, or simply vampire. They want to eschew this mortal form and become something grander, greater, more dangerous and horrifying. Horrifying and dangerous is probably ancillary to the fact that they just want to become something greater. It just so happens that whenever they change, they become something horrific. So there is that element too, which can become a bit of a personal quest, a bit of a nirvana that you're trying to seek out. But it's surprising how rarely that enters the games I've been a part of. That I guess because it tends to take centuries, it doesn't usually fit within a small chronicle. Usually you'll encounter an antagonist Tzimisce that's doing something like that. You know, you break into their haven and you find out they've draped the entire place in flesh tendrils and plants that are made out of spleens and livers. But for a player character to do something like that, the to what end element doesn't generally receive a payoff, I've found. So all of this back and forth is rather... I would understand if you find this unsatisfactory, because the Tzimisce are a messy clan if you try to take them away from what they're good at. Because of what they're good at, they really struggle with everything else. And I find that interesting, but I understand why other people might find that limiting. They are a rare clan where I would say to you, play them as intended, and you will have a lot of fun. But do it within the Sabbat, because that is where the Tzimisce really shine, where you can be a terrifying monster, and you can do some incredibly warped things, and you may be able to transcend this form. Hell, you might be able to stick your brain in another body and wander around in it. The idea is, you are a horror show when you're a Tzimisce, and I think the Sabbat is perfect for that kind of caper. I think as soon as you start breaking those limits, again, I want to hear about your 4.0 specs, Tzimisce, I think you're going to have less fun. You'll like the concept, you won't enjoy the delivery. But prove me wrong, viewers. Tell me about your interesting non-Sabbat aligned Tzimisce. Tell me about your interesting Tzimisce that were not using vicissitude. I look forward to hearing from you, and I will see you again soon. Thank you very much for watching.